Hey guys, welcome to Finally Clicked, the podcast where we discuss business, leadership, and personal development. My name is Margaret Smith, and I'm the Director of Operations for Pickett Street Properties, a real estate team out of Bothell, Washington. And I'll be here every week with our owner and team leader, Jesse D. Moore. We'll be digging into concepts and ideas that have helped us both personally and professionally, and you'll also get a chance to hear from local and national experts that we know provide massive value to get to the point where it all finally clicks.
I'm going to read an excerpt from the book by the author that we interviewed today. And I think that's going to be the introduction and then we're going to dive into this interview with Mara Gleason. We are, as a team, we read a book every week, or a few chapters from a book every week. We just finished One Thought Changes Everything by Mara Gleason, and we're fortunate enough to be able to interview her for our podcast today. And to develop the concept of the book, or to at least hook your attention, I just want to read a couple paragraphs that I think summarize the concept behind the book pretty powerfully. You ready for this, Margaret?
Give it to me. I'm so ready.
Everyone has the capacity to change the way they think about life if there is a compelling reason to do so. 100% of the time, this comes from inside the mind, not outside. Oftentimes, we think that circumstances dictate our reality, that our lives and our experience of life is shaped by the world around us as an outside-in experience. I have learned that this is not the case. Circumstances do not shape our experiences of life. We do. Each one of us, every minute of every day, has the ability to shape and experience our reality from a more profound place, a deeper dimension, a more human place. I realize that I live in an inside-out world shaped by my thinking and my state of mind. I've realized that a person's state of mind is a barometer of their ability to access their inherent intelligence. If state of mind is a continuum and one end is healthy and the other end unhealthy, the closer one is to an unhealthy state of mind, the less opportunity for insight. It's hard to be a productive, creative thinker when the problems of the world are stressful and weigh on you. The healthier one's state of mind, the more reflective one becomes. A lowering defenses and trusting in the ability to gain new insights by drawing on their own inherent intelligence. I firmly believe that when a person is in a reflective state, they are in a receptive state. A person in a receptive state is more open to new thought, and new thought brings about a world of possibilities. So with that, let's jump into the interview.
Okay, hey guys, welcome to another episode of Finally Clicked with Jesse Moore and Margaret Smith. We're really excited today to talk to you about a new book that we've been reading as a team, and we're going to be speaking with the author, Mara Gleason, and we're just going to jump right in. So I actually wanted to start with the story because Mara asked me this yesterday when we were speaking on Skype. She was like, how did you guys find me in this book? And so I thought, Jesse, you might want to share with the audience.
Well, it's not that great of a story.
I think it's good.
I belong to a Facebook group that is a think tank with Gary Keller, the founder of Keller Williams. Mm-hmm. And so that is basically like an online trading post for books sometimes and ideas. And so and it was just in a thread. It wasn't actually even like the main post. Someone was sharing a book. And then in the comments, someone said, well, because he recommended this One Thought Changes Everything book a few months ago, I'm going to read the book that you recommended. And so I don't know. And then someone commented on that post saying, I read that book and it made me travel to LaConner, Washington. Mm-hmm. And so then I thought, okay, any book that inspires people to get a plane ticket and go somewhere, I want to read. So.
That is so cool.
Plus, we're so close to LaConner, that there was the Washington State tie-in. So I had to see what it was about.
Very cool. Well, I'm glad that the book happened to come across your path. As a self-published author, it's always fascinating for me to hear how people came across the book. It's been pleasantly surprising how organic its growth has been. So I like hearing people's stories.
Well, there you go. There's mine. And it's always funny because then the whole team's like, I keep that whole process. I'm like Oz behind the curtain. Like, they know what my process is for picking a book, and it's as random as what I just detailed. So.
Yeah. Well, I want, like, so it may not seem like that much of a story, but I like to share stuff like that because I think sometimes people wonder how we pick things to do or books to read or activities and all around personal development, because people kind of want some guidance. And it's as simple as just staying involved with people that you are with in your network and paying attention. So, but I don't want to go too much further into that. I want you to tell them a little bit about yourself, where you're from, maybe just how you kind of came to be an author and what led you to write this book.
Yeah. It's funny. There's the long story. I'll try to give the brief version, and you can let me know where you want more detail. But I feel very fortunate that I'm kind of one of those people that stumbled into a line of work pretty early on in life and knew that I was going to be very passionate about it just because of, you know, some of the defining moments that I write about in the book. But, you know, the short version is I grew up with a very intense, I would say, sort of traditionally old school style father who was, by no fault of his own, I think he was raised in this way, but it was very stern, very strict. He took out a lot of his anger on my mom and us kids. And I think he was just a very stressed out businessman. And he felt that he was doing the best he can with, or the best he could, given his, you know, work demands and his financial demands and his family demands. But being a kid in that environment on the receiving end of it, I grew up very tense and very afraid of him. And I also somewhat, you know, again, I don't ever want to be pointing fingers because I think everyone's doing the best they can with what they learned. But in sort of having my mother around more as my person I spent more time with and role modeled after, is she very much revolved around his mood. So when he walked in the house, she became very tense. We became very tense. And that was just kind of the pattern that I picked up on at a very young age. And so it was to my absolute shock and delight that my dad, via the boss of his company, was sent on like a leadership development program when his company was tanking. And I intentionally had him write the last chapter of the book because I really wanted his perspective included in the story as well. But, you know, of course, being his child, I had no idea what was going on behind the scenes in terms of his work life. But he was basically tasked with turning around a failing company. No wonder he was stressed. And one of the things that his boss did was sent him to this consulting agency in Northern Washington, where he was to learn about his mind so that he could be a more effective leader and more capable at potentially overcoming this huge challenge of turning the company around, because literally it was going to be seized by the banks if they didn't do something dramatic. And so in that process, it was the first time my dad had ever really been forced to look within and see the ways in which his state of mind was really limiting his life on so many levels, both as a manager in a company setting, but also, and what was so cool is that they didn't even intentionally talk about this, but he was able to apply it to his family life, and really could see that as a father, he was hurting things more than helping things in the household. And within a week of exploring his mind, he came back from this business trip. And one of the first things he did is he sat down and spoke to my brother and I on the couch. And I remember at that age, I was around 11, I think, just being absolutely shit terrified. Like, why does my dad want to have a talk with us in the living room? It was like this very formal moment. And so much so that I have very vivid memories of kind of looking at my brother as we were walking from the kitchen to the living room, being like, what did you do? I don't know. What did you do? I didn't do anything. It was like, kind of like, what's going on here? Quick, let's figure it out. And to my absolute shock and surprise. And honestly, at that time, kind of discomfort and horror. What I saw was my dad just break down and be very emotional and vulnerable with us in a way I'd never seen before. I'd never seen my dad cry before that moment. And he cried and he apologized and he said, I've learned some things about myself this week. And I want to say sorry for the way things have been. And I promise that things are going to be different now. And that was so surprising to me. It was so uncomfortable to me. It was so odd to me. I didn't know what to make of it. And, you know, the short version is I left that conversation feeling very, very skeptical. Like, we'll see. And I even remember asking my mom things like, did he get in a car accident? Did he almost die? You know, kind of what's behind this? Because it was such a surprising shift in his tone and how he'd ever been with us that I couldn't really make sense of it. And I was expecting it to go away quickly. Whatever he was referencing, I assumed people didn't really change. They just wanted to change. And so for a couple of months, I just kind of observed him. And I noticed that while he was not, oh my gosh, suddenly the sweetest, kindest, most easygoing person in the world, it wasn't like this 180. It was 50 to 60% better. And that was huge. Like, I think there's that author that wrote the book, I think it's 10% better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and
I think that's Dan Harris.
Yeah, the one who used to be a correspondent.
10% happier.
10% happier, yes. And I get it that, you know, 10% sounds great. But honest to goodness, I felt like I saw 50 to 60% better. And that was huge in my world. I mean, that just was noticeably, palpably different in our household. And so I finally got up the guts to go kind of at 11 say, hey, can you sit down and talk to me a bit about what you've gone through? What's changed in your mind? Because you are different. You weren't lying. You're starting to catch yourself and readjust your mind in the moment in ways that are making things much better. How are you doing that? And so that began my journey of really getting interested in what he had learned and how that had changed him and the effect that it had on our family. And very long story short, that was why I decided to pursue this as a passion and a career, because I really felt a sense of wanting to pay it forward. Because in my 11-year-old head, he was the biggest, baddest, toughest nut to crack. And if you could teach him something that could make him change that much, that was like, you could do anything. So I got really interested in learning about the mind and where change comes from. And the biggest thing I can say about that is I think realizing that it's not externally determined is perhaps the most profound thing any human can learn. And that was what, when I started talking to my dad, I learned was the biggest shift for him. He had always been a reactor to the things in his life, to his job, to his finances, to his family, to the mess that we would make and leave on the floor as kids. And I remember feeling that, like, always waiting for him to come in and react to something we'd done wrong, you know? And anytime any human learns about the mind and discovers that I'm not actually just a passive reactor to my experience, I'm actually creating my experience from the inside out via my own mind, there's this huge door of freedom that opens up for people. And suddenly they're able to have more choice, which has better feeling with it. And when people feel better, they do better. And now running a nonprofit, that's our whole premise in terms of looking at global challenges and social issues. And really what's behind any social issue or challenge is people suffering. And if people can learn something about their mind that helps them feel better, they can start to do better. And it's amazing how simple that is, but how overlooked it is in so many of the biggest challenges that the world is trying to deal with these days.
Yeah, I mean, the concept is simple enough, I guess. I can't help, we read a lot of books, so I can't help but compare your book a little bit or think of other books that like complement your book. And one book that comes to mind is called Leadership and Self-Deception. Have you heard of that book?
I haven't, no.
And so I'll just say that it's by the Arbinger Group, which is a group made up of a Jewish man and a Muslim man, and it's awesome to see their work, their collaborative work together. But what's interesting about that book is it does explain like a very simple concept that's kind of locked away in the like you have to chip away at this facade that we've made of emotion and nurturing and what we learned from our parents and everything else to kind of get into this to get to the place where you can kind of embrace this simple concept. And then once you get to that place, then it's like looking at an HD TV for the first time, going from standard to high def, right? Where once you have this concept unlocked, it like opens up so much of your mind, it seems like. And so it is a simple concept, and sometimes it's difficult to get people there, I would think.
Totally. Yeah.
And so even myself, I've read the book and I've read tons of books, and I do have certain obstacles. Like Gary John Bishop wrote a book called, what was the first one called? Unfuck Yourself. And we had him on the podcast, and he has his book is very similar in that you control everything. Like your viewpoints and how you think of things controls every part of your existence. And he had a really rough childhood, and he had a lot to be angry about. And you may have had my father growing up. It sounds like we had very similar experiences. And I'm still getting to the point. I understand the concept. I'm still trying to like get it to work on like the last bastions of anger, and I'll just leave it at anger. Maybe some resentment as well, where I still have a few of those demons hanging on, where I'm trying to apply this concept, and that anger's hanging on really hard. It's trying, no, but this, you know.
Yeah.
But I do see the freedom, and like that's why I'm going to keep working at it, because I see the freedom that can come once you apply it.
Yeah. I don't know if you remember, but there's a chapter in the book where I talk about when I was first, because even after I had seen my dad's change, it wasn't until I decided to immerse myself and get trained that I had to go on my own journey of realizing I had appreciated his change from a distance, but I had still held on to my own beliefs about him. So while I liked that he had changed, I appreciated it. I appreciated it so much that I wanted to learn about it and pay it forward. I still had my own anger and resentment, totally. So and I remember thinking, yeah, no, I get it, that everything comes from the mind and it's all inside people's thoughts, and that's fine and dandy. And I see that with certain things, but let's get real. There are these things that you grow up with, and they're so deep rooted, and they were so, excuse me, but fucked up at the time. It's like, I'm not just getting over that. Like, right. Sorry. And I remember feeling a little like it cheapened my experience, or it somehow didn't do justice to, you know, the reality of my childhood and the things that I had, you know, really struggled with. And in the book, I describe how there was one of my colleagues, a gentleman named Dickon, who was talking with me about this. And I was essentially arguing with him that this whole premise, this whole concept that the world happens inside out, and that it's really our mind projecting an experience onto the screen of life, was fine and dandy in some circumstances, but in other things, you are literally just a victim of what's being done to you by other people, by circumstances, and was really pushing back on him. And I love him, and I'm so grateful, because he just very gently told me to quit fighting it and quit trying to figure it out. And I think that's the one distinction that I really like to make when we're working with people, because especially now, like most of the the populations and the situations I'm working in are things like youth dealing with the gun violence in Southside Chicago, or young adults in Israel and Palestine trying to deal with the persistent religious conflict going on there. And to be able to say, oh, you can control your experience of those things is not helpful. And it's not accurate because we can't control it. But what my beautiful colleague Dickon helped me do in that moment was be willing to get some distance from the rigidity with which I had always seen it. It wasn't that I was able to flick a switch and go, you know what, I'm just going to have nice thoughts about my childhood, and therefore that's going to be how I feel about it. I'm not going to have any anger, la la, yada yada. It's going to be great. Like, I'm going to positive think my way to a better childhood. Like, it was not something I could manually shift via my own free will. And what he was noticing in me as I was trying really hard to do that, and he said, just drop it. Don't work so hard at it. In a way, it's just a direction to look in, to be curious about, and to see what reveals itself to you. And it was funny to me because that night, when I gave up the fight, when I got sick of trying to work it out in my head, while I was doing something completely different. And if you look at your life, you'll see millions of examples of this. When you're desperately trying to remember where you put your keys, or you're trying to come up with the name of an actor. And there's this funny, paradoxical, annoying phenomenon that happens where the harder you try to grab something, the further it runs away from you. And there's this beautiful thing that happens to everybody, where when you completely let your mind go around something, insight pops in. New idea, a thought you've never had, an aha moment, an epiphany, whatever you want to call it, or just literally an image pops in your head of exactly where you left your keys. And it's this fascinating default mechanism of the mind. It's not something we control. It's something that we fall into by accident when we stop trying to get it. And that happened to me that night, where I totally forgot about the argument I was having with him. I quit trying to figure it out, and I was cooking rice. It so stands out to me because I was literally staring at a bowl of rice, a pot of rice. Like, you know, I went kind of brain dead for a minute, kind of just like, oh, is the rice done? And then all of a sudden, I had this image come into my mind of my dad's car driving up the driveway and me getting really tense and uncomfortable. And it was the first time that I ever saw that there was some mechanism happening inside of me independent of him, because he hadn't even walked in the house yet. That was the first hint that I got that maybe I had some habit inside of my own head, completely inside my own mind, that made me live in a permanent state of tension and preparing for the worst before I even saw my dad's face. Now, this is not to say that there weren't times that he got out of that car and walked in the house and then was a big jerk to us. It was completely, I didn't need to see anything more than, hey, wait a second. There was something happening inside my mind this whole time. And it wasn't coming from him, because in that moment I could see that was physically impossible. That there was something happening inside of me. And then I realized, oh yeah, I do this when I pick up the phone. Like, I remember when caller ID came out, because I could see if dad was calling. And I could see all these ways that my mind had jumped to a habit of thought around him that had been a participant and a player in our dynamic, in our relationship. And I'd never seen my part in it before that. I'd always thought it was 100% him. So just that like tiny little glimpse made me start to get curious that I might have had a much bigger part in it than I'd ever considered. And that had its own ripple effect in my life. But I didn't control it. I wasn't like, I'm getting over my anger and resentment about my dad today. So step 1, step 2, step 3. It was much more fluid and somewhat surprising. And it really was when I wasn't trying. And it's funny because one of the reasons I self-published is I had a really great opportunity with a big publishing house, but one of the things that they wanted me to change about the book was to put a list of how-tos at the end of every chapter. It's like, did you read the book? Because not only do I not want to do that, that would ruin the book. Like, that would completely give the opposite message, because I'm not suggesting that this is something that people can manually take step 1, step 2, step 3, and then magically, voila, have this mental freedom. There's a way in which it's less personal, it's less manual, it's more, I hate to say it because it sounds so cheesy, but it's sort of just this magical thing that just happens when you're not trying.
Yeah, it's more ethereal, it seems.
Yeah, exactly. And if you try to squeeze your hand around it, it's going to slide out.
Yeah, it's true.
And that's true of all the simple, beautiful truths in life. If you try too hard to package it or to manipulate it, the simplicity of it just gets destroyed.
Yeah. I get it 100%. And that's the beauty. That's why I love that's why I just love it. Because it is so much like that. And then once you harness is the wrong word. Once you accept it, then it it just expands your universe.
Yeah.
In real estate, I tell clients all the time, the hardest part of my job is dealing with other agents. It takes a certain amount of arrogance to be self-employed. It takes a whole other level to be a real estate agent. And I read books to expand my mind and to improve my abilities and to become a better person. And they've helped me be more self-aware. And my challenge is that I can't do that for the person on the other side of the phone from me when I negotiate, right? And so one of the concepts after reading the book, I'm curious, how you market this, how you tell, how do you market this concept to a big audience? And I know you have, right? Because I know about the conference and what you're doing globally. Mm-hmm. How do you take a simple concept like this and make it accessible to the masses?
Yeah. Well, there's two things that come to mind. One is I feel like it's really simple because it's something that everyone is looking for, which is I've never met a person ever, whether it's a multi-million billionaire CEO or a kid who's living homeless on the streets, that isn't looking for more freedom of mind. So for me, it's not about trying to convince people of any certain particular outcome or way of being that they need to embrace or practice that they it's so much more fundamental than that. It's looking at what is universally true but often misunderstood about the human condition, that if people understood it, they could get more freedom of mind. And so in my mind, it's you're talking about oxygen and people need to breathe. So freedom of mind is something that I never met a human that was like, nah, I'm good in that department. Don't care. Not interested. But in order to even have that conversation, I think you have to listen to people first. And I've learned a lot about listening in my career. I know I've been an entrepreneur. I've started my own for-profit company. Now I've co-founded a nonprofit company organization. And so I know you have to be good at marketing what you're up to in order to grow. But it's never really felt like marketing to me because I feel like if you listen to people, there's just a connection that gets made at some point. And if what our organization is about is bringing people more freedom of mind, more resilience, more well-being, and then therefore that leads to the capacity for them to solve whatever they want to solve in their life. Like I said, whether that's gun violence or persistent conflict or, having a better sales team or creating a better company culture, anything people are looking to do, they're only as capable of doing it as their mind will allow them to be. And so if I can listen to people, they will tell me the ways in which they don't feel freedom of mind in trying to accomplish those goals. And so once we've heard it, then it becomes very easy to talk to them about how to get it in a way that's relevant to them, that's real to their life, that's helpful, that's actually helpful.
I feel like in your book, you referred to it as wanting to feel okay. Like everybody wants to feel okay. Everybody wants to feel peace. Everybody wants to feel better overall. And I think one of the reasons, and well, I know one of the reasons why I really connected with this book was because of Jesse's experience with his dad growing up. Because immediately, like reading the chapter that your dad wrote and reading the chapter where you talked about how you changed how you thought about your dad and you realized your part in it. We've talked a lot about how do you bring someone into awareness, and you can't drag them. They kind of have, like your dad, the chances that he was taken to some random retreat that he probably wouldn't have chosen to go on with the company going down. It's so intriguing to me because I think I tell Jesse all the time, and I'm totally an optimist. I'm very much like, I was raised in a family where thankfully I was like, my mom and dad programmed my brain to work a certain way. That's very positive, always very resilient. I'm so thankful for that. And when I see other people that had different experiences, and what I see the person that Jesse could be if he had that freedom, because he's so amazing right now and such an amazing leader and speaker and teacher, that when he reaches that feeling of okay or feeling peace, it's going to be like a whole new world. And so I think that's what hit me the most about this book, is I feel like it's a simple solution, but it's not easy. It's finding the people in your life that you want to expose to it and getting them to a place where they might be open to hear it. And I think it's just, talking to you about the podcast and what I want to do around the retreat and the things that I do outside of my job, really, so much of it is around this, because I was given that gift at a very young age, and I feel super grateful for it. And I want other people to feel that same freedom.
Well, I'll jump in on that and say this. I started getting real purposeful about reading books and bettering myself, becoming aware, because I bought a book called Fierce Conversations by Susan Scott. And I bought that because if we talk about your relationship with your father, my existence was very similar, extremely similar. And so I thought that I needed to read this book so that I could give it to my father and he could read it, and then he'd be self-aware and then we'd be fine, right?
Right.
And I read the introduction in the first chapter and I'm like, oh, this isn't for him, this is for me. And I will say the same thing in regards to your book and what Margaret just said, is that sure, I can think of 100 people that need to read this book, but the reality is that the most important person that needs to read this book is me. Yeah. And so while I get what Margaret's saying, it's not it's not a weapon to be used against the people in your past, but really an instruction manual for your own life.
Yeah. I think that's one of my favorite things that I've personally gleaned from all of this is, I mean, look, what you said is I probably hear that 98% of the time when I work with people from any background. The first thought is, you know, who needs this?
Yeah.
And then they list off whoever is their challenging person or people in their life. And one of the things, like I said, that I've loved in my journey of this is really, truly seeing that if I can appreciate the flexibility of my own mind and the capacity for me to have a reaction, have a judgment, really take something that someone said really badly and get uncomfortable, and in the next moment have freedom from that thought, have it come into my awareness, into my consciousness, feel very strong, but not sit down and have tea with it, not set up camp there and feel like, well, this person sucks and I'm never going to be able to have a good conversation with them, or that freedom of my own mind to go back to the drawing board in any moment and release my mind from perceiving something only one way, perceiving someone only one way, has made me feel really excited about my own capacity to not be deterred by people or restricted by things in life. And yeah, it started with my dad, who was absolutely the biggest one for me. But then I started realizing, like, oh my God, this is so helpful in business. This is so helpful going into different communities of different backgrounds. Like, there's a million and one times a day where you can feel like someone else is a challenge for you. Someone else is difficult. Someone else is the problem. It can be the barista at Starbucks. It can be your boss. It can be your spouse. And that, like you said, willingness to see, oh, it only ever comes back to me. Like, that's been the message I've learned over and over and over and over again in this. And I love it being married. and I'm about to have a baby, so I'm going to have even more experience of this, of being willing to see, like, my own enemy, but also my own best friend is my mind. And if I'm willing to look there, then there's no such thing as difficult people, or there's no such thing as insurmountable relationship issues. And that, for me personally, when you talk about, like, oh, this book is for me, that writing that book was for me too. It was really getting clear that, yeah, it all comes back to our own mind. There's so many times a day where it looks like it's the world out there or people out there, but anytime you're willing to look to your own mind, you go from a dead end to a world of opportunities. And that's been one of the most helpful things I've discovered in my journey as a human.
Well, I'll tell you this, the book had a huge impact on me as a parent. I have 3 kids between 10 and 13, and we all make those promises as a kid, right? That we're not going to do it how our parents did it. We're going to be different, right? And you know, I think every generation improves incrementally.
Yes.
And so, and we all look for, like, landmarks, right? And so I know, like, for my father, his dad never said, "I love you." So for my father, saying "I love you" to his kids was a landmark. That was like, hey, there's a goal. I'm gonna push the ball forward generationally to now where we can say "I love you" to each other. That seems, maybe that's a big thing. Maybe it's not. Like, for him, it was a big thing, but for me, it wasn't enough, right? Yeah. And so and then as I become a parent, I end up doing the same things, acting the same way, creating the same type of environment, and looking up and going, wait, I was going to be different. I was going to do this differently. And because I am a product of my environment, and because I'm much like you, looking out the window, looking at my father coming in and having this apprehension and the sense of dread, or the sense of not knowing what's going to happen next, is that totally conditions you, whether you like it or not. It conditions you for decades. And we're going to respond in kind unless we look for opportunities to grow. And it's not fun. Like, it's not fun reading your book as a parent and realizing how I developed some of the processes and the environment that I've created for my kids, and realizing that there are times they're afraid of me. You know, I don't love that, but I'm welcome the opportunity to be introspective and see that, and then go, okay, yeah, like, I literally have to sit down at the table with my kids and do what your dad did. Like, I have to sit down and say, I'm sorry, and things are going to be different. So I was wondering if you had kids, and so you have one, and I like, because I can't help it but think that I know so many people. I grew up in a ranch kid in Montana. And that's, you know, you're forged by hard work and sweat and blood and tears, and, you know, and you can't help how you're created. And now I live in Seattle, which is a very different experience. And I welcome that for my kids. And I still bring all that stuff with me.
Yeah.
Unless I am conscious about it and find a way to do something different. And that's what I'm doing by reading your book.
But I think that's the most magical thing any human can do, is be conscious of it and be willing to take accountability for it and be open about it. Like, no one is perfect. And I don't even, I mean, I'm about to have a baby, but I don't have one yet. And I joke with my husband all the time. I can see it. I'm going to be, I'm going to be the bad guy. I'm going to be the tough one compared to him. Like, he's going to get everything he wants from you, and I'm going to be the heavy. And I can see, because exactly like you shared, I'll notice that when I'm really stressed and in a bad place mentally, I will exhibit a lot of the behaviors that I grew up seeing toward my husband. It's not even my child. It's like, he calls it my useless piece of shit tone of voice. And I have and it's strikingly similar to the one I grew up hearing. It's this voice that starts to come out of me that's like, everything you're doing is wrong. You're a useless piece of shit. Like, why isn't this cleaned up? What's wrong with that? Why didn't you do this? And the amount of times where I've been like, oh God, I sound like my dad right now, and felt guilty about it. But I think the most, like, you have to have some compassion toward yourself. And everything you said is as true for you as it is for every human. Is we can't help that there were certain habits of thinking that were pretty ingrained in us at a very young age. But the thing that I've learned is the ability to realize in that moment, this is about my state of mind and no one else's. And if I can take accountability for that in the moment, I can make it better. Not perfect. Do I wish I hadn't done it? Do I wish I didn't have that tone of voice? Absolutely. I wish I never said and did those things. But I know that in my lower moments, that kind of behavior, that kind of tone comes out of me. But I'm really grateful for that ability, like you said, to have some self-awareness around it and to apologize for it. And it's amazing how open people are if you are genuinely coming from a space of owning it and apologizing for it. And that was what I saw change in my dad. My dad didn't become a walk in the park who had a totally different personality. He just started taking accountability in a way that he hadn't before. And that was night and day different. And I think to teach kids that, look, you're going to have your shit days where you're going to be the worst version of yourself. But if you can take accountability for that and you can apologize for it, that's good on you, you know? So I want to give you a little hug through the Skype here and say, you're doing the best you can. And that's the best thing
like, as you're talking, like, this question keeps coming to mind for me. Like, Jesse talks often about how sometimes it's hard, like, you get stuck in your own mind and you don't even want to sit alone with your thoughts. At what point were you okay doing that? Like, for yourself, how do you, I mean, that's also another loop and like another habit. Because you say, like, to free your mind, to sit with your mind, to sit with yourself, and to be introspective and to look within. But what if you can't look within? What if looking within is just, I don't know, dangerous, scary, like not possible? Do you talk to people about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what my job feels like sometimes is, you know, that show MythBusters?
Yeah.
Where they, you know, disprove all this stuff that we thought was always a certain way. And I feel like there's a lot of myths that we're brought up believing to be true that aren't actually true. And one of them is that our own thoughts are scary. And I see that as, unfortunately, a really damaging misunderstanding that causes a lot of people to spiral into more mania, more depression, more insecurity, because everyone has randomly scary or bad thoughts. But when we start to get freaked out by them, we have a very intense reaction to them. And anything we have an intense reaction to becomes a bigger part of our experience, right? So, for example, I felt so grateful when I first learned this, that I had in my early 20s, like a couple years of anxiety issues. Like, I could have panic attacks sometimes. And what I learned through this process of learning about my mind and learning about my thoughts is, oh my God, I just have anxious thoughts sometimes, but I have a really intense negative reaction to those. And therefore, they become a much bigger deal than, let's say, the random thought I had 20 minutes ago about should I paint my nails pink or blue. But you can see that people become innocently obsessive and then debilitated by a whole bunch of different kinds of thinking. For some people, it's anger. For some people, it's insecurity. For some people, it's anxiety. But if you look at small children, they have every thought and experience under the rainbow, and they don't judge it yet, and they don't react to it. So kids will have a tantrum, and 2 seconds later, they're lovely, and they're super nice to you, and they want to read a book and be friends. And then the next minute, they hate you, whatever. And I think one of the coolest sort of myths that we help people bust is this misunderstanding that you're going to have only the kinds of thoughts that you want, and that you have to be afraid of the really negative ones that you don't like, and you have to do something to run away from them. If people just let the randomness of their mind be, most of us would find that we have a natural up and down, like every single system in nature. Some days are great, some days are bad, but that's okay. You don't need to be frightened by that. You don't need to change that. And that allows people to be very at peace with the fluctuating nature of their mind. When people get afraid and they literally can't look within, it's because they've demonized what's going on in their head in a way that just scares them. And they're like, oh, I don't even want to look there. And then they come up with coping mechanisms to keep them away from ever letting their mind settle. So you see people become addicted to drugs and alcohol, or you see people become addicted to, what do they call it? Like thrill seekers, junkies, people that are constantly kind of like, we're just keeping themselves busy, got to be doing this, got to be doing that, got to be going here, got to be going there. Because there's a way in which they're frightened of the contents of their own mind. And I think, like I said, one of the really helpful things that we try to do people is help people normalize and get comfortable with the randomness of their mind and not react to it. And then it becomes very easy to look within because you're not judging what you're seeing. You don't really mind. And peace of mind to me is not having an absence of uncomfortable thinking. It's having uncomfortable thinking and being okay with it.
And so based on that, then did the panic attacks go away, and does that go away completely, or does it just get better, or because now you know the answer to it, it's you mitigate it?
Yeah, for me, I was really surprised. I just went away. Not that I don't ever have temporary anxious thoughts, but they don't spiral into an anxiety or a panic attack because I don't have a reaction to them. So yeah, there are days and moments, and my husband can tell, where I'll be like, I don't know what's up with me. I'm kind of anxious today. But again, I'm not like, stop the press, I'm having anxious thoughts. I mean, so I kind of just have them like I would have any other kind of random thoughts in a day. You'll notice from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., you go through about 47 different moods. And for me, sometimes anxiety is one of them, but it's not been to the point of an attack since I learned what I learned.
All right, I'm going to ask you a specific question. Hopefully it's not too specific. Hopefully you can answer it. So let's talk about your dad for a second, and that story of him, and he goes and he gets his training and things turn around, right? He turns around, his personal life turns around, family life turns around. But when you talk about the business specifically, I understand these concepts, I understand how they help, but I'm curious specifically about his business and that going in decline, and then him being introduced to this concept, and then the resurgence of that company. Can you give us any idea specifically how that thinking benefited the company and how it helped turn the company around? Other than like a global thought, is there any specific instance you can give?
Sure. And, I asked him to write his chapter because obviously I didn't know, my 11-year-old self didn't know what happened at that time. But many years later, I got to know my dad's company very well, and even went in and did some training. So my version or understanding of what happened is that if you look at my dad, prior to understanding his mind, he was absolutely, I don't know if you'd call it like a slave driver. His type of management was very, what was that?
A tyrant, maybe?
Yeah.
Tyrant.
Very much my way or the highway. And I mean, I think he even says it in the book. I just didn't understand why people couldn't fucking do what I asked them to do. You know, it was like there was so much tension around his leadership style. And because of that, I think it brings out the worst in people rather than the best in people. And so people are working scared as opposed to, you know, inspired or creative or whatever else. So I think the biggest thing that changed was he became way more attuned to and interested in how he could talk with people, manage people, lead in a way that was going to unleash their potential to sell, not scare the crap out of them. And then he quickly learned that, well, what he had learned probably benefit anyone at any level of a company. So he started actually incorporating this kind of training into the whole company. So it was really a two-step process. One is his management style changed dramatically from a fear-based one to a, how can I bring the most out of the minds of my people? And that has a lot to do with how I treat them and the kind of feeling that I walk around in. And then how can I empower them with some of these skills that I've gained and learned about my mind? I don't know if that answers it specifically enough, but that's kind of what I sort of...
It makes me think of like how our society is so obsessed with quick fixes. And I think some of the thing that's really remarkable about this book is that when I read that part about his company, because they had about, I think it said like 6 months before that they had to turn it around. And then he went to being the number 4 company in the industry that they were in. It's almost unbelievable. It's kind of like, wow, is there really something like 3 to 4 days this can change a person? Yeah. And so I think that's what's really, that's the magical piece about it, like that you talk about, that I think people have to believe a little bit. It just gets me thinking about like, how do you, as much as I know we can't do it, how do you get more people exposed to this? How do you get them to a place where they're even open to receiving the idea, or do they all have to be just taken to a retreat in the corner? And that's not possible, obviously. But it made me think of like all these quick fixes that we're always trying to do for weight, for depression, for everything. And they all have to do with external things too, now that I think about it, not ever looking internal, which maybe that's the key, is getting people to hear that message, is that everything that they've been trying is all external. And so maybe this is just something new and different, which then may make them consider it. I don't know. It just got me thinking about that concept.
Bingo. I think you just hit the nail on the head. I think that's exactly why we named our nonprofit One Solution, is because looking at the mind is the fastest solution to solving problems. And yet, societally, we're looking so many places other than the mind. You know, we're looking at money to fix it. We're looking at politics to fix it. We're looking at someone or something or some institution outside of us to fix these problems. And what we've seen is actually, if you point people toward their own mind, they can make dramatic shifts in a very short amount of time, which, to your point, seems sort of unbelievable or overly simplistic at first. But given the opportunity, I think most people will take it, because most of us would like to be able to change things faster and not be frustrated. Like, I think of the kid here that we work with in Southside Chicago. He's 19 now. We met him when he was 17. And in the space of I gave a talk at a peace summit at his high school, and then we had a breakout session with a group of them after. And that breakout session was all of, I think, an hour and a half long. And similar to me in the beginning fighting my colleague Dickon, he was kind of fighting me on the whole, well, the violence in Chicago is completely out of our control. It's this cycle that we're born into. We can't change it. It is what it is. And if you grew up around what I grew up around, you'd be saying the same thing. And it was so fascinating, because I think what you saw happen with him was exactly how it happened with me. It was almost like there was this moment where he caught himself thinking in a way that kept him locked into that cycle of violence. And the second you see your own mind doing it, you can't unsee it. It's the weirdest thing, but it's like once you see it, you're like, oh, wow. And he had this moment of realization where he realized, oh my God, if I wake up every day thinking I have to kill or be killed, I'm part of perpetuating this cycle. That is me doing it. Oh my God, I never saw that. Like, and we have it on camera. It was this really, and he kind of like got quiet. And then he sort of mumbled under his breath. He said, I could do that.
Mm.
And I'm like, do what? What do you mean? What are you referring to? What just happened in your head there? And he's like, I could do that. I could change that. I could change it in my community because, like, my dad's from one gang, my mom's from another. So I'm in this kind of little untouchable zone where people aren't going to mess with me. I think if I could help people like me see what you just helped me see, I think I could change it. I think I could stop the cycle of violence here.
And not under the myth of someday, right? But now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what blew me away about this, because I'm like, okay, well, if you need my support, I'm happy to help you do that. And I just kind of said it as like a, adult saying something supportive to a kid that seemed to be having a moment like, and he literally 2 hours later came and found me on the lunch break and was like, hey lady, I'm serious about what I said. Will you help me? And then 2 days later, he FaceTimes me from his house and he's like, okay, I got 20 kids here. Tell them what you told me. I'm like, what? And one thing led to another, and that led to us starting this youth-led program to combat violence in Chicago called the Rebels for Peace, which is the name that he and his buddies came up with. And it's the Rebels for Peace because they're rebelling against the thinking that every action must be met with an equal reaction. And he wants to prove that it doesn't. And if you know that, you can stop the violence. To me, that's like, I could never have planned that. You can never explain it on paper, but all I can say is it starts with, same with my dad, same with me, same with this kid, Dejan, a person having a realization that something is not out there, it's in here. And when you see that it's from in here, all of a sudden you can change it.
So what's one of the other books that we talk a lot about is The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. I don't know if you're familiar or not.
I've seen it in a lot of airport bookshops.
Well, one of the concepts they talk about there is that a domino can knock down another domino that's 150% its size, right? So a smaller domino can knock down a large domino and so on. Yeah. And so if we focus on one concept or one goal at a time, that's knocking down that domino to knock down eventually this giant domino, this giant goal. And so as I apply that to you and your work, I would ask, what was the book? What domino was the book? And then also, and here's what I mean by that, and I can maybe kind of answer that by writing the book, that led to the conference, the global conference, right? And so, and then my question would be, what domino is the conference knocking down? What's next for this idea, for this concept, for your nonprofit?
Well, I can answer the last one first, is that the conference was definitely the domino to my passion and clarity that people's minds and their own understanding of their mind is the only true solution to global problems. And I love that. I need to read that book. I haven't read that, but I love that concept of a smaller domino can knock down, because that's exactly what it feels like we're trying to do, is we're taking small dominoes in different parts of the world that have suffered from persistent challenges, and people have tried different things and it hasn't helped, and trying to show that the mind is the little domino that knocks down all the others. That's exactly what we're trying to be up to. And my dream would be that when people are looking at everything from the climate crisis to gun violence in this country to religious conflict in different parts of the world, that they would see the mind as the little domino that knocks all the other ones down. That's definitely what we're aiming for.
And so we want to honor your time and keep you to about an hour. Where do you have a preference where people buy the book? Just Amazon or anywhere they find books, or do you prefer they buy from your website? Where should
Amazon is great. It's simple. It's all set up, and it's frankly the only place I know how to buy it from. So, other than my living room, I got a few extra copies you can come by.
Well, it's a powerful book. It's a powerful concept, and we appreciate you coming on and talking to us today.
Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure talking with both of you.
All right, thanks, Mara.
Margaret's going to take over the rest of the episode.
Welcome back from our time with Mara.
You look a little stunned. You like a little...
Oh, I am. I am a little bit, yes, because, you know, I don't know if this is intuition. I have so many things running through my brain. So we were kind of joking in the meeting. I forget what team meeting we were in when I said, oh, I'm going to reach out tomorrow. Like, I'm going to find a way to connect with her. And we were only probably a quarter of the way through the book. But there was something that grabbed me, and I'm always open to exploring and just seeing. I mean, maybe I would have met her and said, "Oh no, this, she won't be good for the podcast." Or you never know what you're going to find, right? Mm-hmm. But I think I'm kind of shocked because essentially what Mara's talking about is something that I've wanted to do. And I've never heard anybody talk like this before, and I've never heard it talked about in this manner, or like a concept and an idea taken into action in the way that she's doing it and the way that her group is doing it from LaConner. And so I'm just kind of super intrigued. I'm like, how in the world did we happen upon this? Things like this just pop into our lives for a reason, usually with time. And some of the things that she said today on the podcast, they're just lining up with everything else and people that we've talked to over the last 8 months or 9 months since we started this podcast. Number one is Gary John Bishop. When she referred to children and how children entertain thoughts and let them go, literally that was almost word for word what Gary said at the Pacific Northwest Operations Retreat. He referenced a 3-year-old and how 3-year-olds have so much joy because when they're sad, but it's for like 2 seconds, and then they move on and they're joyfully happy. And then something else she said, I'm not going to forget what it was now, but EnMay referenced the same thing in episode 13, having to do with the mind. And so I'm seeing all these connections being made, and I'm like, this web that we're weaving is really intriguing me. And it just, again, it gets me excited for where we're going in the future with this podcast and with our business, because I feel like a new door is opening, and I don't know exactly what it is yet, but it's these key people that we keep meeting, and Mara is one of those. And the other thing too is I had a short Zoom call with her prior to this podcast yesterday, or day before yesterday. And, people come in all sorts of different ways into your life and all sorts of different personalities. And Mara is a very different personality and style than Gary John Bishop. However, I find her style almost like lures me in like and she talks about this in her book. It's like a slow, I imagine like a fishing pole. And it's like all of a sudden I'm in there and I'm like, she's like winding you into this. And I'm like, oh my God, it's almost like we're in the workshop right now and we only spoke to her for 50 minutes. I don't know if that makes sense, but...
Well, you have Gary John Bishop style, which is, it's up to you, isn't it?
Yes.
You have that, and then you have Mara. And what I would say, I think what I'm hearing you say is, there's these people in life that seem, maybe it's just me, but I can think of, I have cousins that are like this, that never get fazed by anything.
Yes.
But they're never they're never over exuberant. They're never under exuberant. Like they're always very even keeled and
mellow. Nothing
really phases them. Mm-hmm. And I've always kind of been jealous of those people. Mm-hmm. Like I like being a passionate person. Mm-hmm. I like having a wide array of emotions. People around me may not as much, And so I've always respected people that could be like very even keeled, very level, without like prone to hysterics or they're just always, and that's what I get from Mara. She's very even keel, and
It makes me wonder if she's always been like that, or if that's something that she worked on in response to what she was talking about with her father being reactionary. Because I've talked about that before with my parents. Love them both, but very different parenting styles. In that my dad was, super laid back. And though, if anything ever happened, like if we ever got in trouble at school, or if I ever had, I always talk about how whenever I broke up with a boyfriend or I got broken up with, he was the first person I would run into. And he's actually rather reactionary. And so we would prefer to go to my mom growing up because she was so even keeled. Like you talked about, you'd come to her, you could say whatever might be on your mind. Hey mom, I thought about doing this. Or hey mom, this actually happened. And she would be like, tell me more about it. What happened? How did you feel? And it's like you never hesitated to tell her anything, because the reaction was always going to be, sure, she might be surprised, but she wasn't going to be so much so that you couldn't continue talking to her about it. You could talk to her about drugs, sex, didn't matter what it was. And that's so freeing as a kid to grow up with someone who will take it in and just say, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
I still love you. What's
Without
happening?
a response.
And that's kind of what made me think with Mara. I was like, holy crap. I can see how someone can sit with her and feel uber comfortable. And so it made me think of the different scenarios that she brought up in her book. The guy that she was talking to in one instance, who in her head, she was like, wow, he kind of reminds me of Hitler. And then he actually said that. And so it's a remarkable personality, and it makes a lot of sense to me that this is, I think, part of her success is in her ability to sit with someone.
Yeah. And then, right out of the gates, you bring up me and my dad. Like,
I can't help it.
Within 5 seconds.
Because that the last couple chapters of the book, I was like,
way to tread lightly.
Yeah, man. Well, I care about you, and I care about your freedom from here on out with how you get to experience the world, because this is your choice. Your life.
I want to clearly state for anyone that's listening that my dad did the best he could.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to get into it, and I'm not looking at throwing any stones or casting any blame or anything.
Yeah.
But he did the best he could,
mm-hmm.
and regardless, I'm still dealing with it today,
mm-hmm.
and that's my journey,
mm-hmm.
and I'm figuring it out. So, because
mm-hmm.
I know some people listen that may want to report back.
Mm-hmm.
So let me just say it that way. No, listen, I'm drained from.
It's been kind of a week.
Well, and it has been a week, and tapping into some of these deep pools can be exhausting.
Yes.
So, I do recommend the book. I recommend the book highly. Honestly, it's now on my top 10 list. I mentioned 2 other books that I think are very similar as in concept, which is Leadership and Self-Deception by the Arbinger Group. That is one of the required books you have to read if you join Pickett Street.
I love that you brought that one up. I hadn't thought about that.
And then Fierce Conversations being the other one. And what I mean by that is I think those 3 books are very
they're like instrumental principles.
No, they're like lighter fluid for awareness.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
Like if you want to improve your life and by becoming more self-aware, like reading any of these 3 books it's good starter fluid.
Yeah, totally.
And so this book is now permanently in our lexicon, in our canon.
I love that lexicon.
And
I love that word. Top 10 for you. That's huge.
Well, I think the concept's so powerful. That's why. It's not that the book is so amazing. Mara, it's a good book. I'm not saying it's not, but
I know what you mean. It's the concept.
It's the concept, and that concept's very powerful.
Did you think our conversation was going to go as it did before recording the podcast with her?
I never know how it's going to go.
Because I felt like you were kind of like, how is this going to go? Before?
Apprehensive?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and here's why. I could pull out 3 or 4 chapters of that book that are how I grew up.
Yeah.
Like 1,000%. And that's disconcerting, So I identify with her a lot. The difference is, my dad didn't go to a conference. And one of the questions I wish I'll never know the answer to, and she won't either, is like, how would she be had that not happened?
Yeah.
And if
I
she wants to
immediately
know,
thought of that.
she can watch my security footage in my house because that's how I feel like it would be. I mean, I'm honestly, I'm dealing with this at a high level right now in my own family, and that is, it is hard. Listen, parenting's hard.
It's hard
work,
either way. Yeah.
no matter what. And one of the reasons why it's hard is because your parents did the best they could.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing so, they're trying to teach you how to do it for your kids.
Mm-hmm.
So I have it in my head, I've actually been thinking about this a lot. Growing up, corporal punishment was expected. Everybody spanked. Everybody. In first grade, my teacher broke a yardstick over a student's butt. Like, it was everywhere.
Yeah.
Like, literally, the teachers were allowed to spank. And
Wow. This was Montana too, I guess.
Well,
'Cause I'm thinking
it's
not that long ago.
we'd get off our horse, we'd go into school. I'm just kidding. We didn't. But no, we would go to school, and listen, I didn't see it happen.
Now I need I'm like, really? Because you're not that.
I didn't see that happen beyond first grade. It's not
Okay.
like people are like taken out of class and spanked. But, it was a normal way of life. And they would often quote a verse I think it's a verse, but spare the rod, spoil the child.
Sure.
And listen, I get it. I get it kind of especially for little kids, babies and toddlers that can't communicate well or I don't know a better way necessarily, but I think beyond like 5, it's not necessary. That's where I've kind of changed my mind, and I probably was spanked up until I was 12.
And then you were saying, so you think after 5 it's not necessary.
And then after that, the phrase was, "You're never too old for me." Like I could always get spanked, But I don't think I was after 12. I don't think I've spanked my kids since like 7. Anyway, it's just everything changes.
Yeah.
And so the way my parents raised me is not how I would want to raise my kids necessarily. And I don't blame my parents. I'm just saying I have different resources and it's a different time.
Different tools, as you say. Yeah.
And so you can't read this book and not like. So anyway, my point is I'm going through this right now with my kids. I don't want them to be afraid of me. And I have a very exacting personality. I have standards. I mean, if you think they're bad here, live with me because I like a clean house. I have rules to keep things clean. You can't have nice things when you have kids. That's something I've just accepted now. And so I get less angry about things getting ruined because I have kids. That's what they do.
Yeah.
But I want my kids to have fond memories of me and their experience growing up. And I know that feeling. I know that there's the danger of them being 30 years old and having a memory of them looking out the window and seeing me come out of my pickup and wondering, is Daddy going to be in a good mood today? I don't want that. I want them to be joyous that I'm home and excited for what we're about to do. And I'm in control of that. So, and my kids are 10 to 13 years old. The damage is done to some degree. But I look at Mara and I look at her experience, and she was 11 when her dad sat him down and said, "I'm sorry, things are going to change." And that's good accountability. And I don't want to be that dad. And I have the power to change it. So I get to. I'm so excited.
You're so hard on yourself. Because I would have to talk to your kids thing is though, you talk to them all the time. And you show them so much love, so much grace, so much. You talk through things. You don't just do something without talking to them about it. And I think that's a huge difference between what you experienced and what.
Well, this goes to what I said in the interview with Mara. Everyone tries to move the ball forward incrementally.
Yeah.
My dad said, "I love you." His dad didn't say that.
Yeah.
In return, my contribution is my kids get to have a say.
Yeah.
They get to speak up. They get to.
speak.
They don't get a vote, they get a voice. So I let them tell their side, which is not something I got growing up. But I can't hang my hat on that. What am I going to pat myself on the back for saying, oh, they got to explain themselves? Because then they're going to grow up and go, my dad was super strict and angry, but he let us have our say. I'm going to do it differently. You know what I mean? Like, I just want it to be a more holistic environment than that.
Sure, I get it.
And I get it all. I understand my parents did the best they could, and I don't have resentment about that.
Yeah.
And I hope my kids have the same grace that say, hey, my dad did the best he could with what he knew at the time. And this came up recently with my son, David, and he's a good kid. And he was on the Xbox, and I had to remind him like 10 different times to get off until finally I just lost it. I'm like, get off the Xbox now.
Yeah.
Right? And he gets emotional, and we talk through it, and I'm like, hey man, you can't do this. Like, I reminded you 5 different times nicely to get off, and you're not, you know? And he's not, because he's somewhat addicted to what he's doing, right? And so he's placing more importance on the game than on his family environment. And we had a conversation about it, and he was hard on himself, and but what's my whole point? He's super hard on himself, and I can't remember what this medication is messing me up. I can't. I feel like I'm untethered all the time. Like, I start down a path and then it goes away. What was I talking about right before that?
Well, talking about
Why did I bring up David a couple of weeks ago?
we were just talking about with your kids how I said you're too hard on yourself, and then you gave the example of David, and I think you're.
All right. So during that conversation, one of the things that we talked about was, like, he said, like, you're always mad at me. Like,
really?
You're always mad at me. And I go, no. And I corrected him. I'm not always mad at you. Like, sometimes I have expectations and you fail to meet them, like we talk about it, or we have standards and you fail to meet them. And I go, and you can't just ignore me. So here's my point. Thank you. Jeez. My point is, and there it goes again. And parenting and styles and everything else. You have to have standards. You do.
Absolutely.
You can't feel guilty about it.
Because that other kind of parenting doesn't work.
I want to teach my kids how to be good humans, right? And so I have to hold them to a certain standard. And my entire life, I've held them to standards that I think are necessary. And what I realize over time is that not all of them are necessary. Kids, I was watching last night. Whose Line Is It Anyway?
Yeah.
And I was thinking, those personalities are out of control.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm like, how would you
And
do
so
it?
how was it to be a kid when they were what was it like when they were a kid, right?
Yeah, probably really
hard. And
hard.
as a parent, I hope you just dealt with it.
Yeah.
I hope you just let them be, right? And then I look at my kids and I'm like, do I let my kids be? Do I let them? Do they have a safe environment to, like, express themselves? Do they have a safe environment to screw up? They have a safe environment to be silly and wacky in a way that might lead to future success in life. I don't want to be so restrictive that my kids don't have the freedom to breathe.
Got it.
And I think that's an important statement.
That's huge.
I think I had sports-induced asthma as a kid. To be honest, it was less about my physiology. Was it less about my lungs and their ability to take in air? It was more about my anxiety. It was more about how I was afraid to breathe. Like, I was in such a panic
all the time.
That I didn't have that.
What would you be like if you had been allowed to be?
Oh man, I don't know. Like, I don't know, right? But I think about my kids, and I just want them to be able to breathe. That was a convoluted way to get there, but that's what I was trying to say.
I think that's probably the most powerful statement that a parent can hear and try to adhere to. is finding the fine line between wanting to have standards and expectations, because I think the discipline's important. It makes them feel safe. And there are some weird quirks about kids that come out with their personalities that a lot of times people try to, I don't know what the right phrase, they try to blanket it. They try to put something over it, try to hide it so that in school they don't get in trouble. In public they aren't embarrassed, things like that. And when you squelch those natural personality pieces, I do think sometimes kids grow up thinking that's not okay. It's not okay for me to have that part of my personality. It's not healthy. It's not right. Mom and dad said, don't do that. It's not what everybody wants to hear or see in public. And so we lose some of our natural talent when that happens. I think that's probably the hugest thing you could communicate in this episode, actually, is allowing someone to be. It's super hard when it's embarrassing. I mean, I go back to my brother Ben because he's the best example, but my mom and dad let us, all of us, just be. And my brother would pull down his pants and pee in the middle of University Village, or he would comment on someone's odd marking on their face if they had a weird, really embarrassing things, where in the moment it could have made my parents really angry. But my mom chose to respond different. She chose to accept the flack from the public, or whoever else was. She accepted the embarrassment, and then she would talk Ben through it. And because of that, that is why he's such a sensitive, empathetic, caring, outgoing, understanding human now. So I think you nailed it on the head, as Mara said. Like, that's the fine balance.
So go to Amazon.com.
Yeah.
Search for One Thought Changes Everything. And
buy it today.
Thanks, everybody.